Here in New York, topping the agenda right now, demoted. Christie out as chair of Donald Trump's transition, replaced by the incoming vice president, Mike Pence. All the details of this major shakeup as Trump's presidential transition takes shape. Also on the agenda, maybe not a full repeal. Donald Trump, in his first post-election interview, he says he's willing to keep some of President Obama's signature health care law. Is it a flip-flop? We'll tell you how Trump is explaining it and putting the pieces back together. A shattered Democratic Party works to rebuild itself after a defeat that no one saw coming. First item of business, picking a new party chair. There's a big name who used to have the job and who's now throwing his hat back in the ring.
Well, I am very interested in the chairmanship of the DNC. Not so much because I think I'm the only person who can fix it, but I think we need a full-time chair.
But Dean may be the underdog in this fight. We'll show you who could be beating him out and why. But we begin with our top story. Breaking news out of Trump Tower this afternoon. Christie is now out. Mike Pence is in as the head of Donald Trump's presidential transition. And Trump's children are assuming many of the leading roles on the transition team's executive committee. Now, we have been watching Trump Tower throughout the day. We are seeing many of Trump's closest advisors from the campaign coming and going. It is clear now that Trump is sticking close to that inner circle that he relied on throughout his campaign as he prepares to assume office. We are also keeping an eye out for any new details of possible appointments as the team works to flesh out the future administration. I want to bring in now Katie Turr. She has the latest on these developments. So, Katie, Christie, transition chair. He's had that job throughout the campaign. Even this week after the election, he's been giving some interviews talking about the transition. And now, though, major shakeup. What do we know about what precipitated this?
We do know that Governor Mike Pence will be taking over, and now he's, I guess, VP-elect Mike Pence. What I can tell you is that sources inside the campaign tell me that Governor Pence really did forge a strong bond with Donald Trump over the course of this campaign, becoming one of his most steadfast defenders and sticking through him even in the rougher points of this campaign. Christie didn't necessarily do that. After it was announced that he was not going to be vice president, Christie started to fade into the background. He was certainly still helping quite a bit with debate prep. He helped craft the apology from the 2005 audio leak. But there is a feeling within the campaign that Christie was not there during Trump's time of need, as consistently, at least, as Governor Mike Pence. Now, Christie will still be helping out with the transition. He isn't totally being taken off of it. But I will note that also on board with this transition are Donald Trump's 3 children, Ivanka, Eric, Don Jr., and also Jared Kushner, who's Ivanka's husband. And why does this matter? Well, Jared Kushner, and we haven't talked about this in a little while, Steve, but you know this very well. Jared Kushner, his father, was put in jail by Christie, and there is some talk behind the scenes that is something that doesn't go away as easily as one might hope in this situation. So Christie not taking no role in this transition, but certainly not the leadership role that he once had.
Yeah, I can tell you, in my days as a reporter in New Jersey, I covered Christie's prosecution of Charles Kushner. Charles Kushner, Jared's father, had been a real estate magnate in New Jersey, a top Democratic Party donor. In fact, Christie prosecuted him. The family obviously didn't like that. They also didn't like that Christie had included details in this prosecution of a prostitution scheme. It was a very convoluted and sordid thing, but that certainly points to another possibility here. What do you know in terms of Jared Kushner and his role in this administration going forward? Because this is somebody who's had, it sounds like, a lot of influence, an increasing amount of influence with Christie. Is this also sort of rising clout for Jared Kushner?
You know, Jared Kushner's clout has been rising steadily throughout this campaign. It's unclear what exactly the role he would take within a Donald Trump administration. We do know that he cannot take a paid federal government agency job. It is just frankly against the law. It's against federal regulation, anti-nepotism laws. So he would need to take an advisory role of some sort that wasn't officially on the paybook or for Donald Trump. But he certainly has had his ear. He's been involved in pretty much every decision going forward with this campaign. He was involved with getting rid of Corey Lewandowski, involved with initially bringing on Paul Manafort, then getting rid of Paul Manafort, then bringing on Kelly Kellyanne Conway and Steve Bannon. You often see, you would see Jared Kushner at campaign events with Donald Trump. He helped with debate prep. I do know he's part of the team that's presenting Donald Trump with a whittled down list of names for each cabinet position. That is including Steve Bannon. It's including Governor Mike Pence and also Jeff Sessions. The four of them are the ones that are really heading up the names on this list. Whether Donald Trump has seen every name yet is still unknown. I know what they're trying to do is make it as easy as they possibly can for him, because there's a whole lot of decisions to be made, and they want to make sure that he's not going to be overwhelmed with them. So they're going to make the list as small as they possibly can, present it to him, and then Donald Trump will decide if he likes that list, if he wants to bring other people on. And they've got a lot of work to do. Remember, 4,000 positions need to be filled, 1,000 of which need Senate confirmation. So for many of them, this is their first job in government. It's a bit of a trial by fire.
All right, Katie Tur on the Trump beat before the election and after. Katie, thank you for that. For more, I want to bring in NBC's Andrea Mitchell now. So, Andrea, a lot of different angles to this. It does seem this Jared Kushner angle in particular is interesting. And Katie mentions there are specific laws that you know, sort of guide what formal position you could put a family member into. But informally, it does seem whatever position, if there is any position Jared Kushner gets, this might be one of the main people where the power is in this administration behind the scenes.
Absolutely. From all of Katie's reporting that we've been following throughout this process, we can see how Jared Kushner's influence has been felt. Through every crisis, he was one of the better crisis managers, he and, of course, his wife, Ivanka. So if there is an anti-nepotism restriction against him taking a formal role, you can bet that in any Trump administration, he's going to be a very important advisor, formal or informal.
And what do you make of this shift, at least formally here, this shift from Christie to Pence? Katie reporting there, maybe a little feeling in Trump world that Christie wasn't fully on board defending him when he needed him most.
Yes, and during those critical weeks, it seemed to me and to most of us watching this, covering it, and outside observers, that Christie took a step back at a very critical point, whereas Rudy Giuliani and Newt Gingrich and others of the political outsiders, if you will, in that inner circle, were coming to his defense. And Mike Pence has been the loyal person throughout. You know, Mike Pence turns out to have been such a smart choice for vice president. Those of us who covered him in Congress, who covered him as the governor of Indiana, know that he has at times been controversial, and we know on some of those social issues, on LGBT issues. But from the Trump world perspective, he has been the steady hand. And knowing Washington, being connected, knowing how to run both congressional office, but more largely the state of Indiana, being an executive in the political context, he is probably the best person, and someone who is disinterested, doesn't have a personal interest at stake in one of these jobs. He's got his role, defined role by election, by law. He's the partner. Obviously, every president decides how big a role the vice president will play, but he's not angling for one of these jobs, and so he's the best person to be in charge of this transition. And I think in terms of chief of staff, where there's a lot of competition, and Christie's name has been mentioned, the most obvious choice would be Reince Priebus if they're going to have someone who has clout on the Hill and knows how Washington works.
All right, Andrea Mitchell in Washington, thanks for taking a few minutes. Want to turn now to Jack Kingston. He's a Trump supporter, former Republican congressman from Georgia. Well, Congressman, let me just start by asking your reaction. Christie out now as the chair of the transition, Mike Pence in. What do you make of it?
You know, I think that the Trump team has to move very, very fast, and they did not want to have any distractions. And there's a potential distraction out there, which you had mentioned. Christie is a very talented guy, but so is Mike Pence. Mike Pence knows the Capitol. He knows federal government. He knows the committee. He has personal relationships all over Washington, but more importantly, he has personal relationships with all the governors. So here's somebody who has the unique background of state government and federal government, and knows the players. He can pick the team and hit the ground running. So I think it would be it will be an absolutely seamless transition. And as Andrea said, Pence is a great guy. I mean, everybody likes him. He's taken stances that people have disagreed with, but nobody accuses him of anything underhanded or anything, you know, out of the ordinary. He's a Boy Scout.
Let me ask you this decision that Trump's going to have to make here about a chief of staff, somebody sort of running the White House day to day. Some of the names that are out there, I mean, the contrast between Steve Bannon, whose name has been sort of floated in the press for this, who would really, I mean, the ultimate sort of outsider to the Washington world, coming from Breitbart, versus another name that's being floated here, you know, Reince Priebus, the RNC chairman, sort of the ultimate Washington player. The contrast between those two, if that is indeed the choice that Trump is facing, the decision he makes here will say a lot about the direction his administration is going to go, no?
Well, it also depends on what the other position is that the other players get, because when you think about Trump as a businessman, a guy who's built an empire about bringing in the great lawyer, the great real estate agent, the great accountant, the business manager, knowing who has the ability to do what job and what their skill level is, I think that's what you're going to find, not just in the chief of staff, but the other people who surround him. And one of the things that you have mentioned very, very accurately is that the family is going to play a significant role. That's great from a trust standpoint. It's great from an emotional standpoint, and they're ex officio, so they can kind of come in and out of various projects and meetings along the way. And I would suspect that some of the key campaign people may move in sort of a direction like that, where they're more of a parallel operation, which all presidents have. When you think about David Axelrod or Paul Begala, who can wear a government hat and a political hat, there is a role for that in a White House.
I just want to ask if you're concerned about one aspect of this, and that is, look, it's no secret you were supporting Donald Trump, but he did not have a lot of sort of prominent supporters out there from the Republican political establishment. You had a lot of, you know, major office holders and names who refused to support him, some who even endorsed his opponent. You have a small world of sort of loyalists here. We know the names: Giuliani, Sessions, Christie, you know, Pence, obviously, his family. Is there a risk here for Donald Trump that this is going to be too insular, that because he didn't have a big group of supporters around him during the campaign, he may not have a broad enough mix of people who are really close to him during his presidency?
Well, let me answer that two ways, Steve. I think it's a great question. But number one, those of us who have been on the team, and I had peripheral part, but, you know, there were some very, very tough times when you had to stick in there. And so I think that there was a baptism by fire, but the people who stuck with him, you know, had to really want to stick with him. And I think that's great. So the president knows, okay, here are the people who I can absolutely trust. Now, the second part of it is, when you become president of the United States of America with 320 million constituents, talent comes out of the woodwork. You would not believe the phone calls that I've gotten from people, and I had no idea they were for Trump, but suddenly they were the best fan out there, and a lot of them have great talent. So I believe he's going to be able to pick and choose from Washington. You know, people do want to respond to a call from the President of the United States. If he says, I want you on the cabinet, I want you in a level, I want you doing something because of your military background, or because of your intelligence background, or because you know health and human services, or you know the interior, there's only one answer. That answer is yes. And it really doesn't matter, you know, how hardcore your maybe political conviction is, because, you know, we've seen Barack Obama bring in a Republican and Ray LaHood. We saw George Bush bring in a Democrat with Norm Mineta, and those are just two examples for each administration. He has the world to choose from, and I think he's going to put together a team that is going to make the protesters happy. Even it's going to be diverse. He's going to have women. He's going to have a geographic diversity. He's going to have a racial diversity, and I'm very excited.
Quick question for you. Do you have any interest in joining the administration?
Well, let me say this. I enjoyed being with the campaign. I think it was a very effective group. If they want me, I'd certainly try to help them. But I want him to be the most successful president in the history of our country. So they need to just pick, you know, who's going to serve him the best. And
all right, a diplomatic answer there. Former Congressman Jack Kingston from Georgia. Thanks for taking the time.
Thank you, Steve.
All right, for more now, I want to bring in MSNBC senior political editor Beth Fooey. So, well, Beth, let's start on Chris Christie, because this is, and I followed this story in New Jersey, and it's kind of amazing for me to watch this unfold right now. Obviously, Chris Christie wanted to be president. That didn't happen. He endorsed Donald Trump. He wanted to be vice president. A lot of the reporting suggested that the reason, maybe the big reason he wasn't picked, Jared Kushner. He had prosecuted Jared Kushner's father. The family remembers Jared Kushner was in Trump's ear. This isn't wasn't going to happen.
Right.
Now Christie's chairing the transition team, and suddenly after the election, that's gone too. Where does Chris Christie go from here?
Well, we saw the gradual sort of depletion of his involvement in the campaign over the last couple of months before the election, even down to that photo that was published the morning of the election. Chris Christie at 6 a.m. in the morning, still pitch black, going to vote for Donald Trump, not taking any press with him. I mean, that was just such a symbolic moment. It just showed that he had really sort of lost his relevance. He lost his connection. We know that that Donald Trump had some concerns about Chris Christie's involvement with Bridgegate. He even said so back during the primary when Christie was still in the race. Donald Trump said he's guilty, he's connected, he knew all about it.
And then after that, put him in charge of the transition team.
Well, there you go. Trump seems to change his mind very easily, but it was clearly something that was there. And the fact that there's that family connection, that Jared Kushner has a personal axe to grind with Chris Christie. Jared Kushner, obviously, he's family. He's going to be much closer to Donald Trump and much more influential than a Christie would be. Also, what could Christie do in the administration at this point, short of being on a personal staff? He's probably not going to get a Senate confirmable job, given the sort of shadow over him because of Bridgegate. So it probably made sense to put in somebody, Mike Pence, who does know the ways of Washington very well, and seems to be a nice guy, easy to get along with, unlike Chris Christie, who is famously a hothead.
All right, MSNBC political editor Beth Fooey, thanks for taking the time.
Yep.
Coming up, Congressman Keith Ellison, Howard Dean, and Martin O'Malley. Those are among the names gunning to be the next chair of the Democratic National Committee. Only one of them, though, has the backing of Bernie Sanders and Chuck Schumer. Up next, what we are learning about the fight for the future of the Democratic Party after a loss that basically no Democrat saw coming. Plus, much more on President-elect Donald Trump's